Jack Ebling and Dan Kilbridge here at Spartan Stadium after Mark Dantonio's Tuesday press conference following the 37-6 thumping by Iowa, getting ready for Minnesota this week.
Mentioned the 37-6 thumping. Obviously some areas they'd like to improve, but as he said a few times a day, the sky is not falling, still a lot to play for, and they'll go back this week and try to correct those mistakes.
What does it say that a Big Ten team could be beaten by 31 points and still be the highest team from its conference in the computer rankings?
It says there's a lot of good teams in the Big Ten this year. I mean, you look at what Iowa's done, obviously Wisconsin, Illinois is a good team. I just think this is one of the strongest years the conference has had in recent memory. Maybe not one dominant team. Ohio State's certainly up near the top, but I just think all around this is a very strong conference right now.
Dantonio talked about his players and trying to regroup, the psychology of it. Kirk Cousins' reaction on the plane ride home and some of the things they have to do to get over that hurdle. How difficult do you think that's going to be?
I think it'll be tough, but luckily they've got 1-8 Minnesota coming into town. Might be a little easier than it would be against an Ohio State or a team of that caliber. But Dantonio said Cousins did some soul searching on the plane home, as did some other players and the assistants. I think they're really going to take a look at themselves and see that maybe, maybe we did get a little too far ahead of ourselves, or maybe there's something we forgot in the game preparation, and go back and I think they'll respond positively this week in practice.
As you know, Dan, Michigan State is an 8-1 football team. And the sky is not falling. It just seems that way sometimes immediately after defeat, but you're never as good as you look when you win, and never quite as bad as it seems when you lose. Michigan State's still in position to do a lot of great things, and with 3 more wins, going to share the Big Ten title or win it outright, but at least be guaranteed the first conference title in 20 years.
Right, and it's not unfathomable that they would do that and win out. They've got 2 very winnable home games against Minnesota and Purdue. Tough game at Penn State where they haven't won since 1965. But you look at what Penn State's done this year. They're on the ropes a little bit as far as they have been in recent years. So State's got a good chance to win all 3 games. The problem is they're going to have to play, consistently through those 3 games, and that last week is really going to be a challenge, I think, on the road. So really, as everyone on the team says, they'll just try to go 1-0 each week and prepare for Minnesota right now.
Absolutely, and Penn State is an improving team, but before Michigan State gets that far, they have these 2 home games and a very strategically positioned bye week.
And I think they could use that bye week. I mean, they look pretty out of rhythm on Saturday, and that's coming off a tough come-from-behind win at Northwestern, which took a lot of energy, I'm sure. Go back to the tough Illinois team and their defense and the things they were able to do. So I think that bye week will really help the Spartans. And, before that, they've got to get to Minnesota. And it was funny that Dantonio mentioned the wheel route today. I'm sure every Spartan fan remembers the wheel route from last year's Minnesota game, which seemingly led to about 4 Gophers touchdowns and gave the Michigan State linebackers fits. So hopefully they've corrected that, and we'll be a little better prepared for that this week.
Well, we've seen it from just about every team since then, and we saw it from a few before who noticed a structural issue there with Michigan State's defense. We certainly saw Northwestern run it, and other teams have tried it as well. But looking at the depth chart this week, what do you think about Keyshawn Martin's chances to play?
I think it sounds like he will play. I mean, you look at everything he did last week, and they still weren't sure. I think he's got a strong chance to play this week. And also, some other guys, he said they thought about taking the red shirt off Tony Lippett last week in order to replace Keyshawn. Luckily, they had Benny Fowler to step in, and he played very well. He's had a few good games now back-to-back. So if Keyshawn isn't able to go, thankfully they've got a good backup in Benny Fowler.
Yeah, you would hope they wouldn't have to do that. If you get to 4 or 5 deep in receiving core anyway, a lot of teams don't do that. But with Benny Fowler and Donald Spencer in those backup roles, and those are your 4 and 5 guys, you're in pretty good shape at receiver.
Right, starting to build depth, as Dantonio's talked about all season. You looked at how many receivers they had to use up last year during the bowl game because of all the suspensions there against Texas Tech. Well, now some of those guys who were getting their first chance and maybe weren't ready for it are now starting with another year in the system, starting to be able to play a little bit, and I think we've seen that.
I think the big concern with this team, Dan, is the offensive line and the running game. 31 yards last week. And you had a very difficult time in the Illinois game running the football. It's been 3 weeks now before Michigan State's played at the level it did earlier against some easier competition. And we know how good Iowa is. That's a very, very good defensive front. But they were getting pressure with 3 guys.
And it is troublesome to see that it's happened the past 3 weeks in a row after such a strong start. You wouldn't expect that after the way they gained over 200 yards in almost every game through 6 weeks of the season. But really, there's just some things going on. I think a lot of different guys making mistakes. It's not one area of the offensive line. It's just a lot of guys not playing as well as they had before, facing some tough defensive lines. They're really going to have to shore that up if they want to have the kind of success that they think they can have this season.
Someone asked me if Minnesota can beat Michigan State. I'm not sure about that, but Michigan State can lose to Minnesota if it plays one of those games where it turns it over and beats itself, and we've seen that happen a few times before. Jack Ebling here with Dan Kilbridge, and we will be back Friday with our preview of the Minnesota game here from Spartan Stadium. Press coverage for SpartanTailgate.com.